Well, hello everybody. This is Professor Rich, and I wanted to take just a few minutes of your time and introduce the next unit, which is learning styles. Now, I'm very passionate about learning styles. As a child, I mentioned I had difficulty learning to read, and at the time, the closest diagnosis they could give me, because I wasn't stupid, was that I was dyslexic, and not a lot was known about it at the time. So, one thing I've learned is that I tend to think in pictures more than words, and that may make some sense to you as you go forward in this lesson. But by way of introduction, I just wanted to bring to your attention a little bit about how we learn and remind you that neurology today has developed extensively, and more you're finding our brains being compared to computers and our senses being compared to the peripherals, with the speakers and the video cameras and the scanners, etc. So as you go through the learning styles, particularly the first unit on visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, please keep that in mind. So, how do we learn? Well, learning, it seems, based on all the theories, takes place in the brain. And for many students that don't study the sciences, physical sciences, or health sciences, this might be of interest because the brain weighs only 3 pounds. It's kind of like a bowl of undone jello. It just sort of, it's not quite congealed and it's not quite liquid. It's composed of trillions of cells. 100 billion of those cells are neurons, and there is electricity in the brain. When learning occurs, neurons send out spikes of electricity to form a learning pattern. And you can see 2 pictures here taken from Skip Downing's book on course that show what neurons look like before. On the left, the picture that seems to be a little bit emptier shows neurons before learning, and if you compare it with the picture on the right, you'll see that it is vastly more filled in. There are new connections that have grown. So imagine the neurons holding hands because they're similarly excited, and all of a sudden these new connections form. So you have neurons before learning, a very empty picture, but on the right I took a marker and I just randomly connected a pattern. But that represents neurons spiking and holding hands. And that pattern, for instance, might be to somebody the learn how you tie a shoelace. That might be the kind of electrical firing that goes off in their brain when they lean forward and go to tie their shoe. That very first lesson that they learned all of a sudden will spark the same way in the brain, and that learning will come forth. If this kind of learning happens only once, the stimulus that caused it is likely to dissipate. It's like a joke you heard yesterday, and you heard it once, it was hysterical, you laughed, but you can't remember it today. Getting back to the tying the shoes, it would be like tying them once or twice, and then that was it. There wouldn't be a burned electrical pathway in your brain. So if you cause the same collection of neurons to fire repeatedly, and the key word or the key phrase is coming up is repetition, the result is usually a snapshot that becomes long-term memory, and that snapshot again is electrical connection. An electrical connection, and you can hear people emailing me as we speak. I apologize. So what we've learned is to excel as a learner, you must create as many neural connections as possible in your brain. And people do this in a variety of ways. Repetition seems to be the way that we do it best for implicit learning. So we've also developed, with all the countless learning theories out there, that there are 3 keys to deep and lasting learning. And before I get into this, I want to explain to you briefly, or mention briefly, that there are countless thousands of learning styles. Since the beginning of time, people, as part of communication, it's as though we want to teach other people things so that we have more in common. And with this learning process, understandably, people are frustrated because it's obvious some people learn differently, either more quickly or more slowly, more fully or less fully than others. So it's different. So that has been an area of concern for centuries, since man even considered education as a discipline. Everybody has got a theory, and everybody's trying to come up with the theory, and as yet there is not one theory, not one size fits all that's really deep and perfect and accurate. But what we're going to go over here are just some of the basic learning style theories. And if I may go forward here, so you folks aren't spending all night watching this video, there are 3 keys to deep and lasting learning. And, new evidence suggests that prior learning has a big part of it, the quality of processing that you're able to do, and the quantity of processing that you're able to do. So prior learning goes back to, for most of the students here, would be your high school and elementary school years. Past learning success enhances present learning if you were a good student. Past learning success sometimes can be a predictor of present learning success. Some students who might not have been great in high school will come to college, and they have still not yet learned some of the best practices to become a successful student, hence this course, College Success. So they might struggle again in college, just as they struggled in high school. But the same holds true for a very good student in high school, because of the looseness of schedule and the general system of college might not perform well because they required the discipline that they had in high school. So there's a lot that goes into this, but one thing we've learned is if you had successful past learning experiences, you can certainly have more successful present learning experiences. Whether you do or don't depends on a lot of factors. So when you connect what you are learning now to previously stored information, things that already formed a neural network, like we said, created a little snapshot, electrical snapshot in your brain, you earn the information faster and more deeply. If learning was shaky, you're probably going to have a more difficult time, because you can't go back far enough to be able to talk about or retrieve information that might be foundational. As I tell students, I didn't really start to do well, I would say, not just in college, but in life in general, till I went back and I taught myself the stuff that I, skipped over in school and on the job, things that I never really learned thoroughly. I just learned basics enough to kind of get through it. And when I went back and I really filled in those gaps, I proceeded forward and things were much better for me. So, that's not to say that if you don't have a very strong past learning success rate that you're not going to do well. If you're listening to me speak, you obviously have taken a step in the correct direction. But it just means that you might have to learn some of the techniques that more successful students have picked up earlier than you. So then we go to the next element, which is quality of processing. And I want you to remember, if you say to yourself, how I exercise affects my physical strength, and likewise how I study affects the strength of my neural networks. Right now, like you couldn't have picked a better time to actually start taking a course about success, because the timing is so close to the new year. And around the new year, we all make these resolutions of getting in shape, going to the gym. And so it's easy to really put on our suffering sweatshirt and say, well, if I'm going to sweat through all these changes, I might as well do it with schoolwork also. So keep in mind that sometimes when you're not as focused on your physical strength, going to the gym, working out, sometimes you're not going to be focusing on your studies as well. It's really a matter of discipline when it comes to quality of processing, discipline in employing a variety of techniques that we're going to be going into here. So some of the strategies or techniques that you can use for quality of processing, you want to underline or highlight, create a concept map or outline, and I'm big into this, and we're going to talk about it later in the course, in about 4 days, that far ahead in the future. We're going to talk about outlining and concept maps, because I personally tend to do something that's a combination of the two. I will, write a sentence, and then there'll be a couple of illustrations, then maybe another sentence. So we're going to talk about the validity of those. But another very deep processing strategy is discussing info with classmates. This is exactly why I have the messaging board. We're going to be dividing you into groups in the next day or so, and you're going to be conferring with classmates that have the same learning styles as you, and you're probably going to find that the communication goes pretty well. When you're trying to learn something, it's very important to create questions. When I'm learning things, particularly now, I teach myself things that I learn, and I do that by asking meaningful questions. So when you can create a question about something, you seem, or in my case, I tend to be more motivated to find the answer to that question, and I think you'll find that you are too. Reading the related material. I sent out a video earlier today about students, about my reading and reading in general, and it seems, from my experience, the past 4 or 5 years, students don't read as much as they did a few years earlier than that. I don't know why those stats would have come through. They're telling me now, and they're calling you folks Generation Z, and I relate to you folks 100%, because one of the defining characteristics of Generation Z is that they have spent, the past 18 years, most of all of their lives, with their face in front of a screen, either a phone or a tablet. And I too, Mr. Professor Rich, the 65-year-old guy, for the past 20 years, I too have had my face buried in front of a computer screen. So I can totally relate. And I too have found myself reading less as I search and scan for information. But I'm going to emphasize this right now. Things are changing, and you have more opportunities without having excellent reading skills, and many of those opportunities were not available in the past. However, the one thing that will never change is the fact that those students that are better at reading and writing and arithmetic will always do better than students that aren't. if for no other reason, they'll be able to do it more quickly. They won't be looking things up or having things proofread or having things read to them. So keep that in mind. Some other strategies: draw diagrams and create models. As you're going to learn, if you're a kinesthetic or a visual kinesthetic person, you like to draw and build things. And some people do, and normally we don't ever teach to those people. It seems that education has been set up pretty much for folks that are visual, auditory, visual reading and auditory. And you'll learn about visual reading on the chapter on learning styles. It's in the required reading area. But students can read code. Code are, would be words representing thoughts or images, and they can speak. And education pretty much has been geared for those students. What we try to do in this course is reach out to students who might not be auditory, visual reading, visual R learners. If you're hearing me say this, it's because you're focusing on it, because you think maybe you might be one of those learners, and you might very well be. We have some rudimentary assessments coming your way. Just to wrap up here, some other strategies for varied deep processing. Participate in class. In an online class, it's not always that easy. I capture your thoughts with journal entries. Try to share things on the discussion board. Hopefully before the class is over, we'll get some sort of lively but tame debate going on the discussion board. But it's always good to participate fully in class for this reason, if for no other reason. You know what's out on the playing field. You know how deep other students are into the topic, where they are with the reading, and it gives you a picture of where you stand in relation to that. And one reason we do so many self-assessments in this class is because successful people generally understand where they are, because they understand that they want to go somewhere else. So it's important for you to know where you are now, or where you stand in relation to your peers, and participating in class is a very good way to do it. Again, we talked about creating questions. However, if you create a test based on information, it really helps give you a full feel of the knowledge. One of the best ways to learn things is to teach it to friends, because if you're trying to teach something and you come to a spot in that lesson that you just can't explain, and let me tell you, as a teacher, just starting out, it was awful, because even though you knew it internally, sometimes verbalizing it in a way that it was going to be tasty for those hearing it or seeing that picture or getting that feeling, sometimes you weren't able to do that. And those were panic moments. So teaching information to friends is a very, very good way to test your knowledge, and more importantly, once again, test your ability to be able to communicate knowledge to others. And again, create a game or flashcards. Honestly, I was never one for that. I'm kind of a serious sort of a guy, so I don't take time to play games. But if you're one that's more into frolic and fancy, that's probably a good way to do it. So I believe this is the last slide here, just to wrap this up. With very deep processing strategies, we talked about everybody, or there being countless learning style studies out there. This is yet just one way, and as we talk about learning styles going forward, you're going to see how all the other learning styles we talk about draw on similar principles that we discussed here. So please keep that in mind. One last thought, dealing with the quantity of processing. We talked about quality in the last slide. The quality of learning is significantly affected by how often and how long you engage in the deep varied processing. Now that's a real highfalutin way of saying the more you study utilizing the techniques that we saw in this slide and in this slide, and there are countless other techniques, but the more you utilize these techniques, the more you're going to do, the better the odds are, the more quality you're going to be able to put into your studies, because you have increased the quantity of processing. And again, a highfalutin way of saying study a real lot the right way. One theory with the quantity of processing here is the distributed practice. And just as if you're an athlete, your brain learns best when the efforts are distributed, because it gives it time to recoup. Frequent intervals, it needs breaks, and the time that you spend on the task to create those neural pathways. You want to avoid cramming at all costs, because athletes don't succeed with a day's training, so why would you think you would succeed with one day's study? But my thought on cramming, and we'll go into this a little bit further down the road, sometimes you have to cram, and so there are correct ways of learning how to cram, and we're going to discuss some of those. But life comes at you, and it's your responsibility to be able to deal with it. So you want to avoid cramming, but realize that sometimes it is inevitable. So let me move out of here, and I'm going to go to what you see now on Blackboard. Talked about the reading. I hope you didn't think that was too hokey. I'm sure I will read that when I look at your comments. But if you move down here, you'll see another item open, number 4, Learning Styles. And here we have the Learning Styles introduction. There's a couple of videos that come pretty quickly. Going back to it, we have Learning Styles, Visual, Auditory, and Kinesthetic. This would be the physiological learning styles. And here you have a couple of videos. And there's a PowerPoint for this, and there'll be a quiz that will be appearing shortly. Then we have Learning Styles, Personality, and the same thing. We have 2 videos, and it's based on the MBTI. And we have the PowerPoint that you may use for the quiz on this. And then finally you have the natural learning style, and this is one of my favorites because basically the natural learning style works very well with online learning, because it's all about asking meaningful questions and learning from that data. Also, if you look in a la carte, we have a new item here. This is Learning Styles and the Importance of Critical Self-Reflection, because the concept here is that you are teaching yourself how to acquire knowledge, and that's the basis of this class. You are learning how to teach yourself anything. And so I'd like you to watch this video. This is a TED video, and without me giving too much away, watch it and explain her theory in 4 paragraphs back to me, so I would feel comfortable that you know what she was talking about. So, as always, everything coming at you, including this video, will be appearing right here. If you need to speak to me or get in touch with me or anyone else, please post to the inbox. Your points are being filled in as we speak. There's always a bit of a backlog. A la carte items are up. You know, do as many as you want, do them or don't. I mean, I sent a video out, it is about the points. New module available, learning styles. The quizzes will be up shortly, and I'll be checking in on you. As always, any questions, shoot me a text, send a contact ticket. I'm here for you. Have a great night, and thank you.